Um, Over the course of my broadcast career, I have made um, some fairly grievous mistakes. Now, by that I mean I've always tried, and I think I've succeeded in being truthful. I've never said anything on air that was not true as far as I knew it to be true. But what I have done on many occasions is um, jump to a conclusion. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I'm thinking right now, particularly, there's a lot of things I could reference about that, but I'm thinking particularly um, a number of years ago, 2002, 2003, whenever it was, when a woman working for then Republican representative from the Florida Panhandle, Joe Scarborough, her name was Lori Clausutis. And when her body was discovered dead in Scarborough's office in Pensacola, I believe, and it started making national headlines, I jumped on that bandwagon that said somehow Scarborough must have been involved. Now, I did that without knowing the coroner's report, without fully understanding the truth of the matter. I was going by the rumors, the innuendo, and my willingness to believe anything that was said about someone that I didn't like, Joe Scarborough. I didn't know him from Adam's house cat, but I knew he was a very conservative Republican. I knew he had been very active in the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And I followed my emotional response to the report of Miss Clausutis' death like a moron. And as years went by and the evidence was made clear what had happened, I don't remember if I came on the air at any time in all those years and issued my mea culpa, an apology for getting on that psychotic bandwagon that said, oh, well, he's got to be guilty. He must be guilty. Look at the proof. So here we are, 17 years later, and the orange ape in the White House is bringing this case up again against Joe Scarborough. There was never any official or investigated evidence that Scarborough had a thing to do with Miss Clausutis' death. And that's what I apologized at some point in the past 17 years. I don't remember when or what program or even who I was working for. But I remember it was an embarrassing moment when I had to apologize. Because I had done everything I possibly could to convince anyone who would listen to me that I knew what I was talking about and what the hell there was proof. And there appeared to be proof. But there wasn't. So Trump now, being the psycho that he is, has raised the Scarborough issue, I'll refer to it that way, the Scarborough-Clausutis issue, in a sickening, vicious way over the past several months. And it's getting worse. And Trump does this in order to divert attention away from his own madness, his own psychosis. Trump can sound and appear so normal, so jovial, so hail and well met kind of fellow, right? He really can. A lot of people can do that. And people can present what appears to be, as Trump tries to do every day, just enough suspicion that would cause people to say, well, maybe there is something there. So let me share with you the story put together by Craig Pittman at the New York Times a couple of days ago, I guess. A little after 8 a.m. on July 20th, 2001, a couple arriving for an appointment opened an unlocked front door at an office in the Florida Panhandle town of Fort Walton Beach and discovered a woman lying on the floor, dead. Her name was Lori K. Klausutis, and she was just 28 years old. The police said they found no signs of foul play. The medical examiner concluded her lonely death was an accident. She had fainted, the result of a heart condition, and hit her head on a desk, the medical examiner said. Now, nearly 20 years later, Klausutis' death has captured the attention of the country's most prominent purveyor of conspiracy theories, the President of the United States, who has, without evidence, speculated that she might have been murdered and that the case should be reopened. The reason for President Trump's fixation? At the time of her death, Klausutis was working for a Republican congressman from Pensacola named Joe Scarborough, the same Scarborough who today, as host of MSNBC's Morning Joe, is a fierce critic of Trump and has in recent weeks decried the president's handling of the coronavirus pandemic as a failure. Trump tweeted last Sunday, which was the latest in a string of recent tweets on the matter in which Trump has unleashed a torrent of false allegations, mischaracterizations, and baseless rumors. He tweeted, quote, "A lot of interest in this story about psycho Joe Scarborough. So a young marathon runner just happened to faint in his office, hit her head on his desk, and die? I would think there's a lot more to this story than that. An affair? What about the so-called investigator?" End quote. And a day earlier, Trump claimed, with no evidence, that the case was now, quote, "a big topic of discussion in Florida," end quote, calling Scarborough, quote, "a nut job with bad ratings," and declaring to his followers, quote, "keep digging, use forensic geniuses. Did he get away with murder? Some people think so," end quote. No one in Klausutis' family would talk about Trump's tweets for this article, fearing retaliation by online trolls of the type who went after parents of the Sandy Hook massacre victims. Their grief has been disrupted by conspiracy theories before, not only over the past few years from the Trump White House, but from some liberals who at the time of her death sought to portray a then conservative Republican congressman as a potential villain. My hand raises. There's a lot we would love to say, but we can't, said Colin Kelly, who was Klausutis' brother-in-law. Scarborough, who was 900 miles away in Washington on the day Klausutis died, and his co-host and wife, Mika Brzezinski, both have expressed outrage on the air in recent days, saying that Trump's false accusations were most hurtful to Klausutis' family. Brzezinski called Trump a, quote, cruel, sick, disgusting person, end quote, and said he was using the episode to distract from the pandemic. The attacks from Trump come as the country's death toll from the virus nears the 100,000 mark, and the ensuing economic devastation worsens. As criticism of Trump's handling of the crisis has mounted, he has turned to his Twitter feed to air grievances and settle scores. He has baselessly accused a stream of perceived opponents of committing crimes, including illegal espionage and election rigging. In the case of the 2001 death in Florida, Trump is pushing a claim that was debunked from the outset by local officials. Despite drawing scrutiny and wild claims repeatedly over the years, there has never been any indication that local authorities plan to revisit the matter. Officials there could not be reached this past Sunday to respond to Trump's claims. But Trump's tweets offer a reminder of the remarkable nature of the Trump era, that a sitting president can traffic in incendiary and false allegations while the political world around him remains largely silent, accustomed to Trump's modern-day definition of presidential behavior. As with many such eruptions from the White House, there will probably be little, if any, consequence beyond, in this case, the collateral suffering of a private family in Florida. A White House spokesman declined to comment. Klotsoutis had spent 2 years as a constituent services coordinator in Scarborough's Fort Walton Beach annex. She was not a college intern, as some have claimed. She was not pregnant either, as some have asserted. And she was not, as Trump claimed Sunday and others have before him, she was not a marathon runner. Klotsoutis had been married for 4 years to a 6'3" civilian Air Force contractor named T.J. Klotsoutis. They lived in a town called Niceville, where the population numbered about 11,000 people, many with jobs at nearby Eglin Air Force Base. She grew up about 20 minutes outside Atlanta and graduated with honors from the University of Georgia with a degree in journalism. She was completing an MBA from the University of West Florida, sang in the St. Mary's Catholic Church choir, and ran 2 to 4 miles about 4 times a week. She was on the board of the Youth Symphony and had just stepped down from the presidency of the Emerald Coast Young Republicans to become treasurer. Paul Lux, then a member of the Young Republicans chapter and now Okaloosa County Supervisor of Elections, said last week, quote, "She was an absolutely lovely girl. She and TJ were very happy. She kept nudging me to come back to the church. Her funeral is what finally got me to come back." End quote. She died on Thursday, 2 weeks before her birthday. She told 2 people that day that she didn't feel well. Her husband was out of town on business, and she'd planned to go to a girls' night out, but she canceled. A second employee in the office was on vacation, so Klotsoutis was working alone. She last spoke to someone on the phone just before 5 p.m. A security guard was supposed to check the doors of the Miracle Strip Parkway office complex that night, but later admitted he probably skipped some. He failed to discover the unlocked office door or see the office lights that were still on. Klotsoutis' job was helping people in Scarborough's district who needed assistance navigating bureaucracy. The couple who showed up Friday wanted a work permit. They found Klotsoutis lying near a desk and called 911. They told the local paper they saw no sign of an attack and assumed she had had a seizure and collapsed. Police reported no signs of a robbery or a violent attack. When the medical examiner was slow to announce a cause of death, speculations began to swirl. The local Northwest Florida Daily News reported getting inquiries, quote, from Massachusetts and Oregon and dozens of places in between, end quote. When one story mentioned suicide as a possibility, Klotsoutis' father-in-law, Norm, wrote a letter to the editor, quote, "Losing Lori was the most painful event in my life of 62 years. It was far more painful for her husband. She was extremely happy with her life, her job, her family. For those who knew Lori, the thought of suicide, as your published reports suggested, is absolutely unthinkable." End quote. Finally, on August 6th, Assistant Medical Examiner Michael Berkland announced his findings. Klotsoutis, he wrote, quote, died as a result of an acute subdural hematoma, which occurred as a result of a closed head trauma sustained in a simple fall, end quote. The position of the body and her hands showed she had made no effort to break her fall, he wrote, and the nature of her brain injury wasn't consistent with an attacker hitting her. Her heart had a, quote, floppy mitral valve, end quote, suggesting she suffered from an abnormal heart rhythm that led to a fainting spell. It also explained why she had felt ill, he said. At that point, her husband made his one and only public statement about the case, praising Birkeland's, quote, thoroughness and attention to detail, end quote, and adding, quote, he did a wonderful job in finding the right answers without rushing to make a quick diagnosis, end quote. But Klausutis' death occurred while the nation was caught up in speculation about the disappearance of an intern for the Bureau of Prisons, Chandra Levy, and her ties to Representative Gary Condit, a Democrat from California. Soon the stories merged in the public's mind, with some labeling Scarborough the Republican Condit, who was never charged with any crime. Posts on such sites as Truthout and the liberal Daily Kos all but accused Scarborough of murder. Filmmaker Michael Moore talked about registering the domain name joescarboroughkilledhisintern.com. Rumors claimed her death had something to do with the 2000 election or 9/11, or that it had prompted Scarborough to resign from Congress 2 months afterward, although Scarborough had announced his resignation before her death. He married his second wife, a Jeb Bush fundraiser named Susan Warren, shortly after his September resignation took effect. Scarborough, who writes occasional opinion columns for the Washington Post, declined to be interviewed. His fullest comments came in a 2005 letter to Vanity Fair, protesting a suggestion that he had been caught in what was called, quote, a sleazy sex scandal cover-up, end quote. This is what he wrote, quote, here are the facts. Lori worked in my office, my annex office in Okaloosa County, Florida. I met her no more than 3 times. I was never alone with her. I didn't leave Congress because of her death. I announced my retirement from Congress in May of 2001. She passed away several months later, end quote. The magazine, Vanity Fair, apologized for what it called, quote, any emotional distress, end quote. The so-called Scarborough scandal picked up steam in 2012 thanks to an unrelated controversy involving Birkeland, the medical examiner who had determined that Klausutis died from an accidental fall. Birkeland had failed to pay the rent on a storage unit he'd used for 3 years. When opened, it turned out to hold more than 100 containers of human tissue, including brains, hearts, and livers. Officials said the remains, kept in leaky cups and dinner boxes, were from private autopsies he had conducted, not ones he'd handled for the state. Birkeland, who is an osteopath, had somehow landed his Florida job despite being fired in Kansas in a dispute over his caseload and autopsy reports, including unproven allegations that he had fabricated some details. In 2003, he was fired from his Florida post for being slow to complete autopsy reports. After the storage unit discovery, Birkeland was arrested. Because this was his first criminal offense, he was eligible for a pretrial intervention program. Upon its completion, prosecutors dropped the charges. Despite Birkeland's unrelated troubles, no evidence has emerged to contradict his findings in this case. He said in an interview this past Sunday, quote, that thing has been scrutinized by a number of other pathologists and it's a solid diagnosis. There's nothing to reopen, end quote. Once Joe Scarborough became a prominent critic of the Trump administration, the right picked up where the left had left off. Trump, a president with a penchant for fanning the conspiratorial flames with fabricated allegations, seemed eager for something to use against Joe Scarborough. In a November 2017 tweet, Trump asked when NBC would, quote, terminate low ratings Joe Scarborough based on the unsolved mystery that took place in Florida years ago. Investigate, end quote. He has tweeted about it 4 times this month. As the speculation about Clasudis' death has persisted, her husband's grief put his own health in jeopardy. In a 2017 interview with Bicycling magazine that touches only briefly on the reason for his mourning, he said, quote, for 5 years I didn't socialize. I traveled, I worked, and I ate. He added that his weight soared to nearly 400 pounds. Through strict dieting and serious mountain biking, he dropped 220 pounds, he said, and, quote, the Hardee's, where I got breakfast every morning, and the local pizza shop, where I got dinner, closed, end quote. He still lives in the same house he shared with his wife. He has never remarried. So there you have it, what, to my mind, is a factual reporting by Craig Pittman for the New York Times on the Lori Clasudis case. And again, I just have to apologize once again to anybody who cares. I mean, a lot of people are listening right now saying, what the hell is he talking about? But I do feel the need to apologize for continuing at the time to buy into the false stories and the lies and the deceptions and the circumstantial evidence that really wasn't all that circumstantial to begin with. And coming to the conclusion that Joe Scarborough must have gotten away with murder. I really feel badly about having done that. And I think one of the reasons that I feel badly about having done that is because I have been, on occasion, the victim of the very same thing. And it's so difficult. I'm sure it was for Scarborough and anyone else who's ever been falsely accused. It's so difficult to try to prove a negative, to try to prove, as in Scarborough's case, that one didn't do what one is being accused of. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. You have your choice. You can listen to The Ranting with the audio podcast or listen and watch me lose control with a video podcast subscription. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.